Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Matt Abbott, Director of Government and Diplomatic Programs at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. We are honored to welcome this afternoon's panelists, Ambassador Glenn Davies, Ambassador Joseph Donovan, Ambassador William Haidt, Ambassador Sung Kim, Alexander Feldman, and our moderator, Ann Weeks. This afternoon, we are on the record, live streaming, and we welcome your use of social media, but please remember to silence your phones. The Council is a membership organization. If you are a member, thanks to your support, which helps us to continue to produce affordable, accessible, and independent content. If you are not yet a member, I hope you'll consider joining at one of our membership levels, which begin at $100. For nearly a century, the Council on Global Affairs has provided an independent, nonpartisan platform for a variety of different perspectives to promote deeper global understanding and active U.S. engagement in the world. Views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or the views of the Council. Turning back to this afternoon's program, after the panel discussion, we will open up to your questions, which we will take from our in-person audience and via our online platform. Those joining us by live stream can type chi.cnf.io into a browser to ask a question. And I will now briefly introduce our speakers. The Honorable Glenn Davies has served as U.S. Ambassador to the Kingdom of Thailand since August 2015. The Honorable Joseph Donovan has served as U.S. Ambassador to Indonesia since November 2016. Alexander Feldman has been the President and CEO of the US-ASEAN Business Council since 2009. The Honorable William Haidt has served as U.S. Ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia since August 2015. And the Honorable Sung Kim has served as U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines since November 2016. Our moderator, Ann Weeks, serves as Vice President of Global and Government Affairs at UL. I will return after the panel discussion to moderate the question and answer session, but for now, please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As introduced, I work for UL Underwriters Laboratories, a terrific Chicago-based company, and delighted to be serving as your moderator this afternoon with this very distinguished panel. We thought we would begin by each of the ambassadors and Alex in his role as President and CEO of US-ASEAN Business Council, offering 4 to 5 minutes perspective on the climate in their particular economy in Southeast Asia, geopolitical considerations, business and economic climate, and then we'll move to a moderated discussion, and then, as mentioned, follow up with questions from the audience. So with that, we'll begin with Ambassador Davies and begin the tour in Thailand.
Sure, thank you very much. And thanks so much for coming out, and to those who might be watching on live stream, and I also want to say to the consular representatives who are here today, thank you for coming to this session. I've been in Thailand for about 22 months. It's been a wonderful experience. The relationship between the United States of America and the Kingdom of Thailand is very old and very positive. It goes back almost 200 years. Next year will be the bicentennial of the first official contact between the two countries, and we'll celebrate it with a big exhibition in Bangkok. We came together 200 years ago, 10 generations ago, because of a condition that I think still exists today, which is that the United States and Thailand, the people of the United States, people of Thailand, share some things in common, most particularly a fierce love of freedom and of national independence and sovereignty. And over the years, the two countries have helped each other to advance our interests, in particular after World War II, when we became treaty allies. But final historical fact is that the United States signed our first treaty with any Asian nation with Thailand in 1833. So it's a long, old, and very positive relationship. Today, the Kingdom of Thailand and the United States have many, many interests in common, strategic interests. We have a large military-to-military relationship, a large law enforcement relationship. We do a lot of health work together. I learned when I took the job that it was Thai doctors and researchers and American doctors and researchers who, working together, discovered the link between mother and children in the transmission of AIDS that led to the interruption of that link. And in many other areas as well, the two countries work together. Thailand is a country in transition. It's a country that has just had famously a royal transition. There's a new king on the throne. And we, of course, expressed our condolences on the passing of the great King Bhumibol after his 70 years as king of Thailand, and now a new king, Rama X, is there. The Thai economy is a bit slowed down of late for a variety of reasons. A lot of them have to do with the cooling of China's economy, but the prospects for Thailand are very, very strong, and we have a very large American business presence in Thailand. The latest effort underway on the part of Thailand is to try to move the economy up the value chain. Thailand has modernized very effectively, industrialized, created a great manufacturing base, part of the reason why American companies are there. But what it would like to do, quite naturally, is move from a manufacturing, industrial-based economy up to an information-based economy. So the government has announced a new initiative called Thailand 4.0 that we are very supportive of, and are looking for ways that we can work with Thailand to help them move up that value chain and move into the information age. The state-to-state relationship, I think, is very strong. Our new president, President Trump, has been in personal contact with the Prime Minister of Thailand. There have been meetings between the Foreign Minister of Thailand and the Secretary of State of the United States, a meeting that went very positively, and a number of other contacts as well. So we're hoping and looking toward, I think, a very bright near-term future of relations with Thailand, economically, strategically, in the people-to-people context. It's worth noting that there are some 7,000 Thai students studying at American colleges and universities. And of course, we want these young, very capable Thais to come to our schools because they bring a terrific perspective from this very successful economy, very successful country in the center of ASEAN. There are challenges in Thailand. Thailand is now 3 years into a coup-led government, a military government. That government, however, has a roadmap to democracy. As a result of a referendum that was successful, a new constitution has been adopted, and we're all looking forward, we hope, to elections in 2018. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. From Thailand, we'll travel to Indonesia, and Ambassador Donovan.
Thank you, Ann. As you heard, I've been in Indonesia now for a little bit less than 6 months. So I usually tell people at this point in the presentation that I'm a real expert. I have all the answers, and don't hesitate to ask questions. But no, seriously, Indonesia is a fascinating place to live, and Indonesia is a very important partner for the United States, in part because, one, Indonesia is the 4th most populous nation on earth. It's the 3rd largest democracy. It's the largest economy in ASEAN. And with regard to us, we're Indonesia's 4th largest trading partner, and we're their #1 export destination. There are a number of things that we look at. That we see tremendous opportunities for U.S. firms wanting to do business there. 2 areas that I would highlight for you. One is aviation, and that is not only the sale of aircraft, but as Indonesia expands its infrastructure, this has to do with security, safety equipment, a wide range of aviation services that we think is a tremendous opportunity, where U.S. firms in particular bring a lot to the table and can be very competitive there. The second area would be in the field of power generation, and President Jokowi has announced a very ambitious plan to increase power generation by over 35,000 megawatts by 2019, and American firms are actively pursuing this market and going forward. The most noticeable or notable event in the relations since I've been in Indonesia was the visit of Vice President Pence last month. The visit was a tremendous success. And I know those of you that listen to diplomats know that all diplomatic visits are successful. But in the realm of all visits being successful, this one was very successful. And I'd highlight 4 areas that I think are really, really important on this. The first of all is the Vice President visited Istiqlal Mosque, which is the iconic mosque in the center of Jakarta, and met with interfaith leaders for a discussion on tolerance, respect for religious diversity, and respect for different religious opinions, and voiced his very strong support for that. He had an excellent meeting with President Jokowi, where he reaffirmed our commitment to our strategic partnership with Indonesia, something that's been going on for several years right now. He then met with business leaders, both American and Indonesian, and witnessed the signing of approximately $10 billion in contracts for American firms. He capped that going forward by visiting the ASEAN Secretariat, which is located in Jakarta, and met not only with representatives from ASEAN countries, where he announced that the president would be going to the 3 senior leadership meetings at the end of the year. And again, the announcement of this was very consciously timed to be at the ASEAN Secretariat to really emphasize our continued support for ASEAN and ASEAN centrality. And he then met with a group from the Young Southeast Asia Leaders Initiative, YSEALI students. These are young people throughout throughout ASEAN, approximately 90,000, about 18,000 in Indonesia, between the ages of 18 and 35, which I've had the honor to meet with on numerous occasions, and he did as well. And this is a group of young people that is truly inspiring. The relationship has continued to move forward since the visit, and particularly as Foreign Minister Retno visited Washington about 10 days ago, with meetings not only with Secretary Tillerson, but also with the Vice President again. And we've had a number of other cabinet level visits that have gone to Washington in the past few days to build on that. So the relationship is moving forward. We have a lot in common with Indonesia, and I think there are numerous and great possibilities for American business there.
Super. Thank you, Ambassador Donovan. We'll move from Indonesia to Cambodia and ask Ambassador Haidt to offer his remarks.
No, thank you very much, Anne. So among the 4 countries represented up here today, Cambodia is the David among the other 3 Goliaths. We may be small, but we are increasingly mighty. Perceptions, of course, of Cambodia remain in the United States dominated by the Vietnam War era, the Khmer Rouge regime that followed that era, and then the very difficult the decade of the 80s when the refugee flow came and over 150,000 Cambodians were refugees and came to the United States. So it's my very pleasant job this afternoon to tell you that perception of Cambodia as an impoverished post-conflict society is in need of updating in the United States. It remains one of ASEAN's poorest countries and one of the smaller economies, but it is on a very, very strong growth path. Its economy has grown by more than 7% for 10 years running, and is projected to keep on that rate for the next few years. The trade and tourism and construction sectors are very strong. There's a remarkable amount of construction in Phnom Penh now. I was on top of one building and I could count 50 high-rise construction sites just by looking around the horizon. Cambodia even has a small internet startup sector now. This is a point of pride. Little Cambodia, land of rice fields and garment factories, has an internet startup scene. 7 million people are now connected to the internet, most through their cell phones. And just last month, the first Cambodian firm received venture capital financing from a Western venture capital firm. It's an internet startup. It has done this really. It has made this progress through a very open business climate. It has the most open business trade and investment regime in ASEAN after Singapore. And of course, it's had for almost 30 years now political stability and an absence of conflict. That's something we take for granted in the United States, where we've had those things for many years, but for Cambodia, that's enabled it to really, to a large extent, begin to achieve its development potential. For Chicago, knowing a little bit about your regional economy, I would say there's a couple interesting points. One of the big trends in the future for Cambodia is agricultural modernization. It's a significant agricultural country. It's the size of Oklahoma, more or less. Its growth has come by planting more fields by increasing the amount of land under cultivation, but increasing in the future, it's going to come from raising yields. And so there are enormous opportunities in Cambodia's agriculture sector for biotechnology, for agricultural equipment, and agricultural technology of all sorts. American consumer brands are very popular. The United States is a very popular country. Cambodians can't get enough of American consumer brands, so many American consumer products companies have been entering the Cambodian market and selling them. Of course, that's an area of strength in your local economy as well. Cambodia is a diversified manufacturer now. It's moving past garments and footwear into electronics and auto parts and other things, and so some American companies are choosing to use it as a construction base. And also infrastructure. Even if it has made that first step of recovery from the conflict era, there still remains a lot of infrastructure to build there. And so just last month, we had our biggest investment ever. General Electric received a contract to build a 135 megawatt coal-fired power plant in Cambodia. And so that's going to be that's a substantial project, which will lead to a big export from the United States. The only other, I'd say two final things. In my view, others might disagree on this panel, it's perhaps the world's greatest place for corporate social responsibility projects. Young Cambodians want to be plugged into the world. They react incredibly positively towards CSR initiatives of all kinds. Some of the biggest American companies are very active in Cambodia in this front. That's something we promote actively. That's the way we help American companies to connect them with the right kind of partners they need. A lot of them use that as a first step into the market, is to do some good CSR work. And then my final point is Chicago is one of the cities in the United States that has a substantial Cambodian American community, perhaps not as big as LA or the Boston area, but still fairly substantial. And so that reverse flow of the diaspora, the Cambodian American diaspora back to Cambodia, those folks are bringing skills and knowledge from the United States. It's proving enormously beneficial for Cambodia's development. In fact, that's the story behind Cambodia's technology sector. Is frankly, it's a bunch of Cambodian Americans in their 20s that are driving that. So that's another connection. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Ambassador. So from Cambodia, we'll go to the Philippines, and Ambassador Kim.
Thank you very much, Anne. Great to be in Chicago, and many thanks to the Chicago Council for hosting us. Wonderful to see so many distinguished members of the Consular Corps here, and to see an old friend from Japan. It's delightful. And the Philippines has been in the news quite a bit recently, so I'll try to keep my remarks brief. First of all, it's a fascinating, interesting, and important time to be working as the U.S. ambassador to the Philippines. As you know, we have a deep history with the Philippines. It's one of our oldest allies. And even though we don't have bases anymore in the Philippines, it's still a very robust military partnership. In fact, just last week, we concluded one of our annual exercises involving thousands of troops from both countries. We're helping them with counterterrorism efforts. We're also starting to help them with anti-piracy efforts. So there's a lot going on the military front, even though we don't have troops there anymore. On the economic front, again, I think it's a very positive picture. The number one private employer in the Philippines is a U.S. company. The number one exporter from the Philippines is a U.S. company. One of the top taxpayers in the Philippines is a U.S. company. That just gives you a sense of the depth of our economic engagement in the Philippines, and I think the future is pretty bright. I think there's still considerable room for growth in the important sectors of the Philippines economy: tourism, infrastructure, manufacturing, agriculture, and I think there are many opportunities for U.S. companies in all of those sectors. The Philippines has been averaging about 6.5, 6.8 annual growth for the past few years, doing very well in the ASEAN context and beyond. And the projections for next year and beyond are equally bright. So I'm all about encouraging our U.S. companies to think about doing more trade, more investment in the Philippines. But what I really like about our relationship with the Philippines is that there are 4 million Filipino Americans living in the United States. That's big. That's about double the Korean American population in the United States. And one of them happens to be the Chicago Cubs super shortstop Addison Russell's mother is from the Philippines. I did my research before coming here. There are also 300,000 American citizens living, working in the Philippines. That's also a substantial number. And then you add to that millions who travel both ways each year. Just gives you a sense of the depth of the ties between our two countries. Another very impressive fact is that over 250,000 Filipinos fought for our side during World War II. This maybe explain why we have the only Veterans Administration facility outside of the United States in the Philippines. We also, of course, have a robust foreign assistance program. USAID continues to provide about $100 million per year in a full range of programs in the Philippines. We have a Peace Corps presence of about 200 Peace Corps volunteers as well. So I think it's an exciting relationship, and I'm thrilled to be there as the U.S. ambassador. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ambassador Kim. So from each of the individual economies, we'll now turn to a perspective from Alex Feldman on the role of ASEAN.
Thanks, Ann, and thank you to the Chicago Council and to UL for supporting our visit to Chicago. The US-ASEAN Council you may not know about, so I'll give you a quick overview. We're a 33-year-old organization that was set up in 1984 to help American business grow in Southeast Asia. At that time, ASEAN was just 5 countries. And for those of you who may not know, ASEAN stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. The Council has grown to represent over 150 major corporations, including UL and Caterpillar and Boeing here in Chicago. And we do that through 8 offices, including 6 in Southeast Asia. We're the only organization outside of ASEAN that's recognized in the 2007 ASEAN Charter, which has given us unique access to the leaders and the ministerials of ASEAN. We've been, for 25 years of our history, we've been bringing United States ambassadors back to the United States to have them meet with communities outside of Washington, to hear from you, to share their experiences, to hopefully share some enthusiasm and ideas about why this part of the world is so unique and deserves some attention, and also for them to learn from our members, from the business communities, from local government and academia about what's on the minds of Chicagoans. So we're very grateful that you chose Ann to allow us to come to Chicago and to have this platform. Turning to ASEAN, it's an auspicious year this year. ASEAN was formed, as I said, by 5 countries, the five of the largest countries in Southeast Asia: Indonesia, Singapore, the Philippines, Thailand, and Malaysia. In 1967, so 2017 marks the 50th anniversary of that group's first declaration and establishment of the organization. Since that time, it's doubled the number of countries within it to include Brunei, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Vietnam. Sorry, in Vietnam. We're hosting the Prime Minister next week. How could I forget? But we have really seen this organization, this relationship grow, and the relationship with the U.S. has grown. In 1977, we established formal U.S.-ASEAN relations, so we're also celebrating the 40th anniversary of U.S.-ASEAN relations this year. In 2015, at the end of the year, December 31st to be exact, ASEAN came together formally as the ASEAN community, and when the business community cares about the ASEAN economic community, which is one of 3 communities that they define within the overall ASEAN community. The ASEAN economic community is a real thing, although it's got some ways to go still before it realizes the dreams of its founders. But it represents over 630 million people today. And it's a very young and dynamic 630 million people. Over 60% of those living in ASEAN are under the age of 35 currently. And To put that in a little bit of perspective within our own country, that makes just the youth population or under 35 population 20% larger than the entire population of the United States. So this is a young, dynamic, growing region of the world. It's one of the youngest regions of the world. As a single unit, as the ASEAN Economic Community, ASEAN ranks number 5 in the world in terms of its economy. So it's the 5th largest economy at $2.4 trillion. It is the 4th largest export market for the United States. Over $100 million in U.S. goods and services go to ASEAN each year. And to put that into an Illinois context, over 3.7, almost $4 billion in exports from Illinois go to ASEAN. That supports 22,000 jobs in this state. So ASEAN, we say, matters, and I hope there's some books that we published just last week on why it matters. But to continue the idea, one of the things that a lot of people are surprised about is that ASEAN is the #1 destination for foreign direct investment from U.S. companies in Asia. And to put that in a little bit of context, it's actually more than American companies have invested in India, China, Japan, and South Korea combined. So ASEAN is really the home of American business in Southeast Asia. And it's no coincidence, as I told the Vice President's staff before he went out to Indonesia and the ASEAN Secretariat, that it is also our 4th largest export market. The investment is not disconnected from the fact that we are exporting so much to ASEAN. And remember, in the world, only China and our 2 neighbors, Mexico and Canada, which are actually our largest export markets, dwarf ASEAN. So I think I'll leave it there. There's more I can go into. There's plenty more in the ASEAN Matters brochures on the table over here. So I hope if you haven't picked one up, you'll pick one up. But Ann, thank you again, and look forward to your questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, ambassadors. So I'll start off with a question that I'd like each of you to respond to in your own context. Each of you spoke on and touched on the bilateral relationship with the U.S. and relatively healthy relationships in a strong place. Could you speak to the broader global environment and how we put that U.S. bilateral relationship into context with relationships that the economies are having now with other foreign and trading partners? Are the tectonic plates staying relatively stable in the U.S. vis-a-vis its relationship, staying in a place of strength? Or do we see signposts that are suggesting sort of shifts or a widening of each country's and ASEAN as a region?
I can take a shot at
Please.
that. Thank you very much, Ann. In the case of Thailand, the relationship between the United States and Thailand economically, I think is stable, and I think has a very bright future. As an example, American companies have invested about $5 billion in Thailand. That investment supports about 250,000 jobs directly and many more indirectly. There are new investments being made all the time. Harley-Davidson just announced the opening of a factory in Thailand. And from the perspective of Thai economic decision makers, companies, and those in the Royal Thai government, there's a deep interest in increasing the level of trade, increasing the investment from the United States of America, and seeking technology from the United States. In the other direction, which is fascinating, there are quite a few investments, some of them new and some of them quite substantial, that are coming in this direction from some of the big national champion Thai companies, including the PTT company, which is their large oil and gas company, which is investing in the American Midwest, the CP Group, which is a large food conglomerate, which is investing in the United States. So there's a lot of this activity. And I think that as China rises and Thais look across their economic landscape, what they seek, which is very much historically been the case, is a balance in their partnerships between trading partners that they have. So we've been there for decades. I think the first American car was sold there over 100 years ago. We have about 800 companies in our American Chamber of Commerce there today, and there's huge interest on both sides of the Pacific in growing that relationship. So I don't think that in the great game that the think tanks like to talk about of, United States versus China, that this is, that frankly you can say that in Thailand there's any kind of a sort of a tipping of that balance in one direction or the other. Thai companies want to have strong relationships with all of their neighbors in ASEAN, with the great North Asian trading nations of Korea, Japan, China, but also with the United States and the EU.
Thank you. Pastor.
Thanks, and again, I dove into my remarks very early on. I'd like to thank the council for hosting us, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here in Chicago. I think it's important when you think of these issues and read a lot of headlines every day, it's important often to step back and look at the fundamentals. And the fundamentals in terms of U.S. interests, I believe, have not changed. And the first part of this is that our prosperity and our security is intimately linked to the Asia-Pacific region. The second would be that the center of gravity for us in East Asia are our alliances and our partnerships. In this context, Indonesia is not an ally, but it is a very significant partner for us, and one that we value very, very highly. So in a sense, if I had to put a headline on this, it would be that a prosperous, democratic, and secure Indonesia is in our interest to go forward. Just to put out some additional economic statistics for you. The American Chamber of Commerce in Jakarta did a study just about a year ago, and they estimated that in the period between 2008 and 2014, approximately 35 American companies invested about $65 billion in Indonesia. This is not announced investment. This is realized investments. These are investments that really went forward and occurred. And I think you get an idea of both the potential and the extent of our involvement with Indonesia on this. All of this argues, I think, for us to stay involved in a number of different ways with Indonesia and to keep moving that partnership forward.
Excellent. Thank
You
you.
want to skip me and come back to me at the end?
We'll wrap with you, Alex.
All right.
Ambassador Height?
As I listened to your question, Ann, I wasn't sure whether that was explicitly a China question or not. I wasn't sure, but I think
There are a
that
lot of countries in the world. China is but one.
when one talks about tectonics, one has these images of plates shifting around. But in any event, I think Cambodia, and perhaps it's the case for other countries in ASEAN as well, is a great example of the danger of sort of looking at every issue as a direct China-America contest, because the Cambodians certainly have learned already how to work with both countries, and certainly to maximize, to build their economic relationship with both countries. I will give one example that China has built hundreds of miles, or probably thousands of miles of highways through Chinese investment, through state-owned companies in highways in Cambodia. They've built thousands of miles of highways. But last year, the leading selling truck in Cambodia was the Ford Ranger. So there's increasingly American, built in Thailand, incidentally, those with engines manufactured in the United States brought over to Thailand. So
It's not manufactured were put together in Cambodia. There's a Ford assembly plant.
No. They're all manufactured, and there's a Ford importer. But in any event, so it just shows you that it's not always a direct competition. And many American companies, for instance, are putting factories in Cambodia and other ASEAN countries to export to China, or to process food to export to China. And Chinese, and even much stronger, many Chinese companies are investing in Cambodia to ship to the United States as labor costs rise in China. So So certainly on the economic side, it is entirely feasible for Cambodia, and I suspect the other countries, to manage those two relationships. On the political side, there's been a big change since when I served 2 years earlier in the 90s, and China has certainly advanced its political relationship substantially since then. And I think part of that is a natural reflection to our consistent advocacy over the years for Cambodia to pick up the pace of democratization and human rights protections. And that is, in a little bit, the Chinese don't message that way to the Cambodians, and I think that's sort of helped draw them a little bit closer.
Very good, thank you. Pastor Kim?
I agree with Glenn's point about the interest level in U.S. economic business engagement. I think it applies to the Philippines as well. There's very strong interest in the Philippines and in the U.S. businesses operating in the Philippines in increasing that relationship. Also agree with Ambassador Donovan's point about U.S. strategic interest in the broader region. I think it's quite clear that the region is important to us. We are important to the region, and I don't think our Asia focus, Asia commitment, Asia engagement will change. One point I would add in the Philippines context, in some ways the China question is more relevant or more in the news in the Philippines these days because President Duterte has made very clear his interest in improving relations with China and for the Philippines to have an independent foreign policy. I mean, I've said this directly to President Duterte, but I also said publicly that the U.S. has absolutely no problems with the Philippines having an independent foreign policy. Frankly, all countries should have an independent foreign policy. And what matters to us is making sure that we maintain our strong partnership, including the military alliance. And I think Philippines leadership has made very, very clear that even as they pursue opportunities to improve relations with China, that the only alliance relationship they have is with the United States, and that will not change. In terms of sort of what we do with the Philippines that could have broader implications in the global context, I think counterterrorism cooperation is one very important example of that. As you know, there is real terrorist threat in the Philippines, and we saw it just a couple of days ago when Filipino soldiers and police officers were brutally murdered by a terrorist organization. So to the extent that we can work with the Philippines military to try to combat more effectively possible growth of terrorist activities in the Philippines, I think has much broader implications.
Thank you. Alex? Bring it
I
home
guess
to ASEAN.
from an ASEAN point of view, I think it's a relationship that is strong, but TPP, which we haven't heard mentioned yet, was an agreement which really I thought would have tipped the balance in the United States' favor. It had some incredible new chapters on labor and human rights and the environment, as well as on the digital economy. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has decided not to go down that road. RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that ASEAN is really driving, although in the press it comes out as the China agreement. It is an agreement that ASEAN designed to try and bring together its +6 partners. It has free trade agreements currently with its what they call +6 partners, which include China, Japan, and Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and India. And the idea of the RCEP is to take those existing free trade agreements and make them a single economic and trade region, allowing Japan and China to benefit from the same benefits that ASEAN and China or ASEAN and Japan currently receive. The idea is also, up until recently, was to bring the agreement up closer to a TPP-like agreement because the number of countries that are not part of TPP were very concerned about the 4 countries in ASEAN, especially, that were part of it, including Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Brunei. 3 of the countries sitting here had expressed interest in TPP, and I think that there's been a lot said in the press about the fact that, at least on the trade front, maybe not on the business front, but on the trade front, it may be, the balances may be tipping away from the United States if we aren't able to capitalize on building relationships in a different way with this new administration, including maybe bilateral relationships. And I mentioned the first ASEAN leader will come to the United States next week, Prime Minister Phuc from Vietnam, we'll have a meeting in the Oval Office with President Trump. He'll also meet with the business community while he's in the United States, both in New York and Washington. I think the Trump administration is paying a lot of attention to Southeast Asia. And I think that that's been played out with Ambassador Donovan's description of Vice President Pence's trip to Indonesia. But we also had Secretary of State Tillerson invite the 10 foreign ministers to come to the United States, and all 10 countries did have a representative. 8 of the 10 had their foreign ministers here. That was 10 days ago when Minister Retno from Indonesia was here meeting with the Vice President as well as the Secretary of State. They also, Secretary Tillerson and the National Security Council have reached out to the ASEAN ambassadors stationed in Washington and brought them together as a group to meet in the State Department with the Secretary early on, and subsequently has had several other meetings. And then President Trump, in addition to inviting Prime Minister Fook to Washington, has asked 3 other leaders to come to Washington from Southeast Asia just in the last 2 weeks. They include President Duterte, Prime Minister Prayut from, President Duterte from the Philippines, Prime Minister Prayut from Thailand, and Prime Minister Lee from Singapore. And both Prime Minister Lee and Prime Minister Prayut, I understand, have accepted the offer, and President Duterte is trying to find a time in his schedule that will work, but he has not indicated that time exists at this point in time. So, but there is a serious engagement by the Trump administration to ensure that ASEAN feels engaged, that the president will go to APEC, which is being hosted by Vietnam, as well as the ASEAN Summit and the East Asia Summit, which adds Russia and the United States to that +6 group of companies. So 18 countries will come to the East Asia Summit, and there's a US-ASEAN Summit as well in November in Manila.
Very good. Thank you, Alex. I think we're going to take some questions from the queue.
Much. We have time for audience questions now. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you. A member of our staff will bring a microphone over to you, so please wait for that for our live stream audience. Mr. Grant, please, in the front row.
First of all, thank you all so much for coming to Chicago and sharing your thoughts. Very insightful, very much appreciated. This is actually a question for Ambassador Kim. Now, I have not read the transcript of the conversation between President Duterte and President Trump, but I'm interested in your view of the triangulation between the Philippines and the United States and China in the South China Sea and the path going forward.
Thank you. Well, obviously, this is a matter of great concern to the United States. In fact, it's a matter of concern to the whole international community. That is how the South China Sea dispute is ultimately resolved. As you know, we don't take a position on the claims themselves, but we've made very clear to the claimants, including China, that we take very seriously freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight is a fundamental international principles that must be protected. President Duterte has indicated that he would like to try to pursue practical cooperation with China, even with regards to the South China Sea dispute. We're not in a position to oppose that effort. I mean, in some ways, I wish him luck in pursuing practical cooperation with China with regards to joint activities in the disputed area. But I think it would take some time for it to develop. In the meantime, ASEAN countries are continuing to work on a code of conduct that would help govern the South China Sea dispute, and I understand they've made considerable progress. Philippines, as you know, is the chair of the ASEAN process this year, so is leading that effort. And I think they're quite optimistic that they will be able to come up with a good framework for dealing with this dispute with the code of conduct.
We will take a question from our live stream audience. Could you please give us an overview and your thoughts on the chances of ASEAN countries downgrading diplomatic relations and economic ties with North Korea as per Secretary Tillerson's request?
Sure, I can take that on. I can speak for the relationship with Thailand, where we've already had a number of conversations with senior Thai authorities. I had a lengthy exchange with Foreign Minister Don just a couple of weeks ago about this. And the case we've made, or tried to make, and I think this is all across the region and indeed around the world, is that we face a uniquely threatening North Korea today. We have a new young leader, North Korea does, Kim Jong-un, who has set aside the policy of his father, which was to agree to discuss denuclearization with the 5 parties in the region and the United States. And he has abandoned that, and he said, I'm not going to negotiate away our nuclear capabilities and our pursuit of nuclear weapons. And this is inherently a dangerous development. So what we are messaging to our partners and allies, in the case of Thailand, is that we now reach a point where all nations who have an interest in peace and stability in East Asia must now play a role if this is to turn out well, because if North Korea won't talk to us about denuclearization, won't talk to China or South Korea or Japan, we need to find a way, in effect, to pressure Pyongyang to begin to do that. So anyone with a relationship with North Korea has a role to play here. So with Bangkok, we've said, we need your help. We need you to try to find ways to restrict the space within which North Korea can operate in Thailand, in these various countries, because North Korea uses the open banking systems, the shipping companies, the open transportation networks of the region in order to gain money that they then use to fund their weapons programs. We saw what North Korea did with that relative freedom. They assassinated the half-brother of Kim Jong-un in the airport in Kuala Lumpur using a prohibited chemical weapon. That was a strong signal to, I think, Southeast Asia about the true nature of the North Korean regime. So this is the nature of the message that we're delivering to our ASEAN partners. If North Korea seeks to export coal to you, we would ask that you consider turning it back. If North Korea seeks to use your banking system to move money around, if North Korea seeks to use its diplomatic establishment to gain resources for the benefit of its weapons program, we would ask you to cut that off. And we're getting a very good hearing from the Southeast Asians, and action is beginning to be taken. So we're very hopeful that if all countries can act to send a strong message to North Korea, to pressure North Korea, we can find a solution to this problem. The only solution to the North Korean nuclear problem is a peaceful diplomatic solution. And this is the way to clarify the choices for the North Korean regime.
Any other? Carl Friedhoff, please.
Carl Friedhoff with the Chicago Council. My question's for Alex. The ambassador for Laos is not here, and I have a question on that specifically. Could you give us your outlook for Laos as the potential for relocating manufacturing there? We heard from the Cambodian ambassador that's starting to happen there, and it seems that geographically Laos would be ideally located to ship north into China, to ship south into Thailand, east and west Myanmar and Vietnam. What does Laos need? Of course, it needs a bit of everything, actually. But what do you hear anything from people, the businesses on the council, that they're looking to relocate there? And if so, what are they asking for to be done first?
Laos is the second smallest population in Southeast Asia. It's also one of the smallest economies in Southeast Asia. There are some of our council members that do have operations, small operations in Laos, mostly in the consumer products business. There is a push both by Thailand and Laos to develop border free trade zones. That makes some sense, but to be honest, it's early days. Laos needs infrastructure. The one thing it does have in abundance is electricity. It does ship electricity to Thailand, I believe, Ambassador, if I'm
Cambodia
correct.
too.
And Cambodia. But as do many places in Southeast Asia, Laos would benefit from having increased skills. English language is a challenge in Laos, and often that's an important part of American investment, and there's many places in Southeast Asia where that's not as difficult. But skills and infrastructure are critical. The Chinese are very engaged and invested in Laos, and are helping, in theory, to build that infrastructure, especially rail links and road links from its neighbors to China. So I think there's some potential, but Laos is sort of a country, because of its size, the size of its economy, that's got lots of room to grow.
We have time for one final question. Ms. Nakamura, please.
Hi, my name is Kuniko Nakamura. I'm with the Japanese consulate in Chicago, and thank you very much for a very informative talk and putting ASEAN into the Midwest context. I was wondering, Ambassador Donovan, you said that a prosperous and peaceful democratic Indonesia is in U.S. interest. I think the whole ASEAN region. And secure. Oh, that was the U.S.-Japan treaty then.
That's right.
This morning, for example, in the Wall Street Journal, I read about the caning of homosexuals in Indonesia. And I thought, oh, what happened? And to me, it was in Aceh, Banda Aceh. So it was put into context for myself. Or the blasphemy law of the Christian governor in Jakarta. And in the Philippines, how the President Duterte, it's being very sensationalized in the US, and I feel like it is forming a perception of the average American, perhaps in the Midwest, and I was wondering if you could put them into context for us.
First of all, with regard to the caning in Aceh, this is we express these concerns at appropriate levels with the Indonesian authorities, not only at the central level, but also up in Aceh. I was there about a month ago before the sentence came out, but while this was going on, we expressed that as appropriate. And I think the Indonesian government understands where we're coming from on that. Certainly with regard to I'm sorry, you mentioned the second case? The blasphemy laws. With regard to blasphemy, we've stated publicly, I have, and also the State Department spokesperson has stated that we cherish in our Constitution the values of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion. We also, in principle, we are very skeptical and critical of blasphemy laws, not only in Indonesia, but as a matter of principle. We also support and commend those political leaders and religious leaders in Indonesia that speak out in favor of tolerance and also of respect for religious diversity and respect for other religious beliefs. And certainly since the sentence was handed down, I think President Jokowi and other Indonesian officials and members of civil society, including the world's largest Islamic civil organization, and who have spoken out also in favor of a multi-religious Indonesia.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to extend a special thank you to the US-ASEAN Business Council and UL for their partnership on today's event. Thank you.